The recent government restrictions on NGOs, please explain how will it change India's geopolitical scenario in the coming years? I am not quite sure of what exactly the details are of various restrictions on NGOs. I think there would be some FCRA restrictions, etc. FCRA is the Foreign Currency Regulation Act. And the thing is this. Okay, let's look into what an NGO is. What's an NGO? NGO stands for non governmental organization, which means that it is an organization that is not in any way linked to the government or any government. And it usually, NGO typically works in the field of social welfare, uplifting society, and doing things like that. So that's what an NGO is. Now, what you will find in India is that there are more NGOs in India than schools and hospitals put together. Isn't that strange? So the NGO industry seems to be booming in India. I mean, it was booming in the past. About 10 years ago, you had more NGOs in India than schools and hospitals put together. So why is was this industry so lucrative? NGOs are supposed to be mostly non-profit things, right? And yet, if you look at take any NGO at random, which is doing reasonably well, and you will find that their employees have very high salaries. And where does the money come from? And these are the questions that typically, obviously, arise, right? And NGOs are allowed to obtain funds from abroad through the FCRA Act, all that. And the thing is that if you trace back the kind of funding that some NGOs receive, you will find that they are linked to very dubious organizations from abroad. Many of these organizations that are funding Indian NGOs have links to foreign governments. All right. So this term NGO, non-governmental organization, even though it's technically a NGO, it many of these NGOs are basically nothing more than agents of foreign governments. And what we find that there are lots of NGOs that go to the Indian judiciary, start these they file PILs, public interest litigations that are taken seriously by the judiciary, and they are able to influence public policy in India. So NGOs, Indian NGOs, that are more or less puppets of certain foreign powers and forces, are dictating and influencing public policy and government policy inside India. So these NGOs have become a means of exerting foreign interference in India's internal affairs. Whether it comes to government policy, public policy, the kind of rules that are enforced in India, whether it comes to religious conversions or whatever else, you will find that all of this is happening through NGOs, via NGOs. So the term NGO is a misnomer. These NGOs may not be related to the or linked to the Indian government, but many of them are extensions of foreign interests, and they are acting on behalf of foreign governments. Mostly it is Western governments. There are some governments in the Middle East, some organizations in some Eastern countries, maybe some maybe linked to China also. Who knows? I don't have the specific details, but this is how it's done. So there is this massive NGO industry in India. It's very lucrative. They get lots of funding from abroad. Their employees are typically very rich. Not all, but some of them have very prosperous employees who get the salaries in terms of lakhs of rupees per month. Some of them do. Yeah. And they all, not all, but many of them act as conduits of foreign governments and foreign influences within India. So this is a huge national security threat for India. Right. The thing is, if you crack down on NGOs, then certain foreign powers will say that democracy is under threat in India. They will lower your democracy ranking in India. And when you go to that country, their head of state or their vice head of state will give our prime minister lectures about democracy, public lectures, things like that. So you see, there are multiple ways in which very powerful countries can interfere blatantly in the internal affairs of India. All right. When it comes to these so-called protests that happen every winter season in North India, if you trace back the funding. See, no protest can happen without money. No extended protest that goes on for 2 3 weeks, months, can ever happen without a significant amount of funding and logistics. It's not just funding. You need a whole lot of logistics to sustain a protest for a long period of time. And where does all this expertise come from? It comes from NGOs, certain NGOs, I would imagine, which are linked to certain foreign governments. So that's how there is this foreign interference that's happening in India's internal affairs. So that is the reason why the government will have its eyes on the NGOs. I heard recently that there was some restrictions that were made, that were placed on certain NGOs. The thing is, that is problematic, because if you place too many restrictions, then these foreign powers, they will complain, and they will say that India is sliding down under the in the democracy index. India is no longer a democracy; it's an autocracy. It's a fascist nation. It is a dictatorship. I mean, this is what the Western media keeps saying day in and day out. And the moment you do this, there will be more of that happening. So, so if India is placing some restrictions on NGOs, it will be because of this only. Now, I would wish that there should be a law that is passed in India, that no NGO is allowed to operate if it receives funds from abroad. Right? That's how it should be. There should also be a law that says no political party should be allowed to receive funds from abroad, because all of that is nothing but interference, foreign interference in India's internal affairs. As of today, India is most likely not in a position to pass such a law because of pressure from outside countries. So that's where we are today. So that is a little about the restrictions on NGOs, and what NGOs how are and what they actually represent.